The reality of spiritual warfare and the importance of the mind. Spiritual warfare is a reality that can exist at every moment of a Christian's life. However, this battle often begins not in the external world, but in the mind. The enemy targets our mental world because the mind is where our beliefs are shaped and where we establish the foundation of our relationship with God. Once a person begins to trust in God's word and promises in their inner world, the enemy steps in. Doubts, anxieties, and fears try to sneak into our minds. Spurgeon described this battle best. Every negative thought that settles in your mind is one of the greatest signs of spiritual warfare. Mental attacks are insidious and difficult to resist. A thought that seems harmless at first can gradually settle into every corner of our minds and pull us away from God. This is why we must constantly protect our mental world. Defensive strategies against mental attacks. The most effective way to deal with mental attacks is to strengthen our trust in God's Word and our faith daily. According to Spurgeon, God's Word is the most powerful weapon we can use in spiritual warfare. God's Word is our shield to ward off any mental assault, Spurgeon says. When we face mental attacks, we must hold on to God's promises. For God is always faithful and will protect us. As the enemy tries to fight us with our minds, continually remembering God's Word provides a source of strength that strengthens our faith. Prayer is another powerful defense. Prayer illuminates the dark thoughts in our minds and strengthens our spiritual power. Spurgeon advises, mental disturbances, anxiety, and fears can always be overcome with prayer. In prayer, we re-establish our connection with God and remember to trust in Him. The impact of doubt on mental breakdown. Many Christians, as they walk in faith, can encounter doubts, especially in difficult times. Doubt is one of the most insidious attacks on the mind. Spurgeon warns that doubts can spread quickly in the mind of a believer. Your faith is as strong as your hold on God's Word. Doubt weakens you, but faith reminds you of God's power. A momentary doubt can create a huge disturbance in a person's mental world. Doubt is the first step in questioning God's faithfulness. God is always faithful to His promises. His every promise is unshakable. By clinging tightly to God's promises, we can overcome doubts as a mental attack. We must not lose our trust in God's Word. Struggling with anxiety and fears. Anxiety and fear are also very common and dangerous forms of spiritual warfare. Spurgeon views anxiety as a sign that a person has lost trust in God. Anxiety is to ignore God's sovereignty, Spurgeon says. The anxieties in our minds prevent us from seeing God's power and sovereignty. These anxieties arise not only from uncertainties about the future, but also from a lack of trust in God's promises. God will never abandon us. He is always with us. Anxiety and fear are destructive emotions that cause us to forget this truth and distance ourselves from God. When faced with such thoughts, the first thing we should do is revisit our trust in God. God holds the control of everything in His hands. His sovereignty covers everything, declaring, this is the first step in breaking the power of these thoughts. Times of mental drought. Another significant aspect of spiritual warfare is the times when we experience spiritual drought, when we can't feel our connection with God. During such times, our bond with God may weaken, and we may struggle to pray. God sometimes sends these periods of drought, but we must not forget that these times are opportunities for our spiritual growth. Spurgeon describes these periods as follows. Spiritual drought is an opportunity for us to remember God's faithfulness. During this time, we should wait patiently and trust in God's Word. Mental drought often comes with feelings of inner emptiness. This kind of emptiness can arise when we feel that we have distanced ourselves from God. However, according to Spurgeon, God's faithfulness never changes, and He is always ready to help us. In times of mental drought, God comes closer to us, and when we wait patiently, we get to experience Him more deeply. Finding strength in community and fellowship. Being alone in spiritual warfare is one of our greatest weaknesses. Spurgeon frequently emphasized that Christians should not remain alone in spiritual battle. Community was created by God for believers to come together and support each other. By helping one another, we can stand stronger against mental attacks, Spurgeon says. Being in community helps a believer to protect their mental world securely. Our bonds with our brothers and sisters remind us of our spiritual strength and renew our faith. Constantly supporting one another enables us to trust in God's promises. Believers can pray for each other within the community, seeking God's help. Conclusion: trusting in God's help to overcome mental spiritual attacks. In conclusion, mental attacks play a crucial role in a Christian's spiritual warfare. Protecting our minds requires living a life based on God's Word, prayer, and being part of a community. Spurgeon's teachings guide us in understanding how we can be resilient against these attacks. Remember, God is always with us, and He is powerful enough to overcome any attack on our minds. Our trust in God creates a safe space in our minds. The place where we win the spiritual battle is how much we trust in God's Word and His power. God is always with us, and His sovereignty is over everything. No matter how insidious or strong mental attacks may be, God's power will always lead us to victory.